He laughed every time someone prayed, his scoff echoing through family dinners, weddings, funerals, as if faith itself was a punchline. All his life, Harold wore doubt like armor, a shield against every kind word, every whispered hope. He rolled his eyes at his wife's bedside prayers, interrupted his children's grace before meals, let every Sunday pass with contempt for those who believed. Neighbors called him the skeptic, his reputation as firm as the walls he built around his heart. Even at church services, he'd sit in the back, smirking, arms folded, a cloud of sarcasm hovering. "Waste of breath," he'd grumble. "Nothing answers." But then came the final night. The lights of the hospital blinked soft and slow, machines breathing in rhythm with fragile life. And Harold, so sure, so proud, so sharp, now lay alone, fighting for every shallow inhale. For the first time, the mocking stopped. In the silence, his trembling lips searched for words beyond cynicism. As the moon carved pale shadows on the floor, Harold whispered, barely audible, "God, if you're real, please, have mercy." Faith and doubt collided in that dark room. For 60 seconds, the whole world seemed to wait, broken, breathless, daring to hope a miracle could pierce even the hardest heart. If you're moved by stories found in ruins, comment where you're watching from. Subscribe now, because some blessings come only when the mocking ends. My name is James, and Harold was my father. To the outside world, he was the picture of a self-made man, gruff, hard-working, relentless in his logic. He didn't need spiritual advice because he trusted what he could hold, fix, build, or bury. Our family grew up in a brick house on Maple Street, its garden kept immaculate, the grass cut sharp as his tongue. He ran his business with a strict hand, respected by clients and feared by employees. But inside those walls, his word was law. My mother, Evelyn, brought gentleness into our lives. She'd sneak out to church alone, praying quietly over stove and sink and before bed. Her faith was soft, determined, never showy. She gently urged us to say grace, to forgive quickly, to love deeply, habits that always seemed to annoy my father most. Dad never raised his voice in anger over faith. He simply drowned out the quiet with argument. He told stories at the dinner table about foolish men who trusted what they couldn't see. He bought us science kits, encyclopedias, gave us allowance for A's in math, never for memory verses. Birthdays and holidays were celebrated with real gifts and laughter. But Sunday mornings he reserved for working in the garage. The radio blasting talk shows as church bells rang across the street. At school, friends teased us. "Doesn't your dad even go on Christmas?" I'd laugh it off, but inside I ached for him to sit beside us just once, watching sunlight through stained glass, listening to hymns sung loud and off-key. Family gatherings exposed the rift. My grandmother would bow her head and pray. Dad would clear his throat, shift the food, offer a sarcastic amen. Sometimes, when we were small, he'd crouch beside our beds, tuck us in with silly stories and a quick sleep tight, never prayers. If we tried, he'd smile and shake his head. "Don't waste your wishes on magic, son. Life answers to work, not words." Despite the skepticism, Dad provided everything except tenderness for faith. When Mom set out Bibles for each of us at Christmas, his sat unopened on the shelf, spine unbroken. I watched that book gather dust year after year, a silent testament to stubbornness. Evelyn didn't give up. She'd whisper prayers over us in the hallway, slip notes into lunchboxes. "God loves you." So do I. My sister Emma followed Mom to church, voice clear in the children's choir, desperate for a hint of approval from Dad. But every time Emma reached for his hand in the pew, he'd quietly withdraw, smiling but unmoved. Through high school, the distance grew. I asked about the afterlife. He countered with physics. Emma prayed before exams while Dad quizzed her on formulas. Mom kept the peace, her secret ministry of patience. Our family photo albums show us all smiling in front of the Christmas tree. But if you look closely, my father's eyes never leave the camera, as though camping on the edge of every gathering. By the time we were grown, faith was a subject reserved for my mother and sister. I watched, torn between her longing and his certainty, wishing the world weren't split in two. Through every joy and every struggle, prayer became a point of silent rebellion, a gentle battle fought across dinner tables, echoing through every room, whispering the question neither side would say aloud. What if the prayers finally outlasted the laughter? The first cracks in Dad's certainty didn't come from debate or argument. They came in the quiet, slow ways life always finds to break you. He lost a close friend in an accident, someone who, unlike Dad, was known for his faith. At the funeral, Dad stood at the edge, hands buried in his pockets, smirk erased. The pastor spoke of hope and eternity, but I saw my father's jaw tighten with something unspoken, his eyes dark and far away. That same year, his business took a sudden downturn. Years of careful management unraveled overnight. A competitor swooped in. Old contracts dissolved. Trusted employees moved on. At the dinner table, Dad stopped telling jokes. He snapped at small talk, retreated to his study with bills and whiskey, letting paperwork pile in anxious towers. We'd hear him late into the night, papers shuffled, muffled anger with no one left to blame. Emma would try to draw him out with stories from church, only to be met with a thin smile and silence. His health began to betray him next. First, a persistent cough he dismissed as allergies. Then chest pains, headaches, days missed at work. Doctor's appointments replaced family outings. Medicine bottles collected dust beside the cash box in his former office. Dad never spoke of worry out loud, but it crept into his every movement, slower, more careful, the edges of strength slipping away. I remember the day Mom found him in the backyard, hunched over with breathless anguish after trying to fix a broken fence. For a moment I saw fear plain on his face, a man unaccustomed to needing help. Mom prayed quietly at his side while waiting for the ambulance. He rolled his eyes but didn't interrupt. When Dad returned home, the silence inside him had deepened. He mocked Emma less, ignored her faith altogether. With me, he talked business, numbers, mundane things. But in his eyes, I glimpsed the shadow of a man who'd built his world on a foundation now beginning to crack. Worse than the physical pain was the loneliness. Friends grew fewer. At church picnics, he sat apart, listless as laughter carried on among families. He never called for help, but spent hours watching the window, lost in a place even Mom's gentle words couldn't touch. Emma tried to bridge the distance, slipping prayer requests under his study door, inviting him to Christmas Eve service. He declined without cruelty, but the light in her eyes faded with each refusal. Bitterness and regret set in. Dad grew impatient with everyone. Routine arguments, sudden angers, apologies that came too late. Once, he lashed out at Mom over nothing, then stayed up the night, sitting alone with a mug of cold coffee. She forgave, but he never asked. The biggest rupture came when Emma, exhausted by years of trying, finally stopped asking. She left home for college, her faith unwavering, her heart battered. Without her, the house felt empty, Dad's skepticism now tinged by sorrow. There were no more family prayers, no nightly arguments, just the steady thrum of oxygen machines, hospital bills, and a growing silence where hope had been. Dad's wall of laughter and mockery was still there, but behind it I saw the abyss widen, and for the first time, I wondered if the man who had always mocked the prayers of others might one day run out of things to say. Life continued, but it was hollow. Without Emma's gentle reminders, Mom's hopeful grace, faith all but vanished from our home. Dad went through the motions of living, but his skepticism lost its energy and became resignation. Work was no longer an escape. The company had been sold to bigger hands, and Harold now spent days shuffling bills, returning calls no one wanted to answer, and obsessing over which part of his body hurt most each week. Music faded. No laughter rose from the kitchen, no jokes at prayer. The silence was not peaceful. It was the echo of conversations that would not happen again. Mom still prayed, quietly, alone, mostly over the dishes or during her walks in the yard. Sometimes she'd sit beside Dad, book in hand, and read a comforting verse. He no longer interrupted. He just stared out the window at the dying maple trees. Weekdays became indistinguishable, colored only by occasional doctor visits and medication schedules. On Sunday morning, the bells rang across the street, but Harold never looked up. Mom attended church alone, sometimes joined by me or a neighbor. Dad's study was now a fortress, walled in by unopened mail and silence broken only by the buzz of a malfunctioning heater. Bitterness grew roots. Harold stopped answering calls from old work friends. When I visited, he preferred talking about sports or small repairs instead of anything close to his heart. He didn't lash out, he simply faded, every conversation a retreat, every opinion tinged with weariness rather than wit. His skepticism became apathy. The fire that once burned to mock and debate died down to cold embers. He watched the garden decay with the seasons, ignoring the weeds, letting time unravel what he could not rebuild. Occasionally, I found Mom staring at old family photos, tracing the outline of Emma's smile, the distant warmth in Dad's eyes. She never gave up believing, but I saw the toll it had taken on her resolve. At dinner, she'd ask, "How was your day?" Dad answered with a shrug or a tired, matter-of-fact phrase about the news. Faith was now a muted mystery, locked up in a drawer somewhere alongside love letters and old receipts. The disconnect grew between Dad and me. Every attempt I made to draw out a real conversation died in the silence between us. He stopped asking about my life, didn't inquire about Emma's studies, rarely expressed pride or regret. Through all of this, Mom kept praying, sometimes slow tears on her hands folded against her cheek. I admired her devotion even as I doubted its power. But her faith kept the lights on, kept the home gentle even as the walls got colder. On his worst nights, Dad raged quietly, shuffling through the house, muttering curses under his breath, angry at everything and nothing. His body grew weaker, his spirit more brittle. The world shrunk to the dimensions of his sickbed, the weight of time pressing on every breath. It's easy to say that life without God is simply empty. But for us, it was more like drifting, unmoored, anxious, a space where every hope had been boxed away, waiting for the day someone would be brave enough to open it again. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It crept in gently, almost unnoticed. One evening, the hospital corridors glowed with a weak sunset spilling through blinds. Mom sat quietly beside his bed, holding Harold's hand, the same way she had on better days. She didn't say much, just whispered a brief prayer. Normally, he would have scoffed, looked away, made a comment to break the mood. But this time, he just listened, brow furrowed, lips pressed together in thought. Early the next morning, a nurse entered softly, her face calm and professional. She was new, a woman from another town, known for humming hymns while washing hands. As she checked vitals, she pressed a small handwritten note onto Harold's tray. "You're not alone, ever. Even here, someone listens." It had a tiny cross drawn in one corner. Harold stared at it for longer than expected. I saw him hold it and then slip it in the drawer, not tossing it away. Something unsettled him, a discomfort that lingered, quiet but deep. When she left, he asked, "Did you ever really believe all that stuff?" Mom nodded, tears brimming but voice steady. "I always have." Later that day, an old family friend stopped by, Pastor Reed, the kind of man who wore wisdom gently. He didn't preach, just spoke about gardening, joked about growing old and stubborn. Before leaving, he simply said, "If you ever want someone to pray with you, you know where I am." Harold didn't answer, but that night he slept badly, waking often, turning the nurse's note over and over in his fingers. I found him at dawn, his eyes red, but he didn't look away. For the first time he asked, "Do you think God would ever listen to someone like me?" The question lingered, a subtle, hopeful ache where there'd only been mockery before. The shift was quiet, but real. Days that followed, Mom's prayers were met with silence, but not resistance. Dad didn't interrupt her. Sometimes his lips even moved with hers, wordless and awkward. He kept the nurse's note near his pillow, reading it when he thought no one saw. The first sign wasn't thunder. It was a small whisper that the wall was weakening, an opening for mercy to slip in. As the days slipped into weeks, the hospital became its own quiet world, a place where time stretches and boundaries between hope and regret blur. The staff changed shifts, but some faces became familiar. One orderly, Mr. Thomas, always paused for a gentle word. One night he brought in an old radio, tuning it softly to hymns that drifted into the otherwise sterile room. Instead of ridicule, Dad simply listened, the strain on his face softening, his gaze far away. Emma came to visit, her presence like spring sunlight. She set her bag in a corner, took Dad's hand, and shared stories from college. Late nights, friends found and lost. Even campus worship gatherings she joined for the comfort of voices rising together. Dad listened without comment, but didn't pull away. She reached into her journal, pulling out a faded piece of paper. "Dad, I've been praying for you." He smiled, forced at first, then genuine. "That sounds just like you." She didn't back down. "It's not too late." "You know." Harold looked out the window, silent but unsettled. The following Sunday, A small group from church stopped by to sing outside his window. Their voices were tentative at first, then grew stronger. Amazing grace, how great thou art. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Emma squeezed Dad's shoulder. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the melody reach him. Instead of sarcasm, he let quiet gratitude flicker. That night, he scribbled a note. Just a few jagged words. If there's anything left, help me find it. I'm tired of being right all the time. Little moments accumulated. He thanked a nurse for praying for him, asking her to leave the radio on at night. He asked Emma to read aloud from a worn book of Psalms, just to hear it. During one particularly hard night, pain kept him awake. Instead of curses, he squeezed Mom's hand, asking her to pray for peace for both of us. As she prayed, his tears fell, silent, gentle, not fought. I stayed overnight once, and woke at dawn to find him staring into the pale morning. He spoke softly, almost embarrassed. You think there's a shot for someone like me? Yes, Dad, there always is. He nodded, closing his eyes, whispering words that hovered between hope and confession. From then, Harold's walls began to fall in earnest. He welcomed the pastor for short visits. He shared a laugh with Emma over childhood memories, reading bits of her Bible aloud, voice raw, unsteady. He let himself be prayed for, no longer joking or resisting. The skepticism that once separated him from our family began to loosen, each tender act a small miracle. Every difficult conversation, another stone tumbled from the wall. The breakthrough didn't happen all at once, but it was real. Harold's heart, weathered by years of self-reliance and doubt, turned quietly, aching, but open at last to the mystery he'd mocked, the grace he never thought he'd ask for. Late one night, with the monitors clicking quietly and the city far away behind rain-streaked glass, Harold's breathing became shallow and uncertain. He grimaced with each inhale, knuckles pale where he clung to the blanket. Mom sat beside him, eyes bright with fear and hope, while Emma dozed lightly in a chair, Bible open on her lap. Harold motioned for me to come close. His voice was so faint I almost missed it. Gone was the bravado, the sharp wit, replaced by tremor and ache. James. I'm scared. I don't want to go alone. I held his hand, unsure what to say. For a moment, we simply listened to the storm outside, the distant shush of wheels on wet streets, a world moving indifferent to this small, sacred corner. Then he looked up, searching our faces one by one. I spent my whole life laughing at people who pray. But his breath caught and he stifled a sob. But now I just wish I'd understood. I wish I'd listened. A trembling hush filled the room as his walls crumbled for good. With desperate honesty, he whispered, Would you pray for me? All of you, please. I need mercy. Mom's hands shook, but she laid them over his. Emma moved to his other side, tears streaming but voice steady as she prayed. God, meet Dad. He's tired. Forgive what needs forgiving. Show him your love, even now. A rush of sobs took him. For the first time since childhood, Harold prayed, barely audible at first, but growing clearer. God, if you really are, I'm sorry. I wasted so much, please. If you'll have me, don't let me be alone. There was no thunder, no voice from heaven, only a sudden, impossible peace in the room. His breathing steadied, the tension left his hands. Emma kissed his cheek. Mom wept softly, and I squeezed my father's hand and found it warm, alive, full of hope. Even as pain lingered, relief finally flooded a heart that had always thought surrender was for the weak. In the stillness, Harold, who had mocked and resisted for decades, whispered, Thank you, and for the first time in years, the only sound in his room was prayer. The days that followed had a new rhythm, a gentle slowness threaded with gratitude and quiet reconciliation. Harold remained in his hospital room, but something in the air changed. Nurses entered softly, sometimes finding both my parents pressing their foreheads together in prayer. Emma took shifts reading from her Bible, sometimes sharing verses, sometimes just letting silence be enough. Dad's conversations softened. He talked about regrets, not just in faith, but in love, kindness left unspoken, time wasted on pride. To Emma, he apologized for years of ridicule. To Mom, he thanked her for believing when he could not, for never abandoning her post as his protector. Each apology was honest, awkward, and healing. Each thank you a step back toward something good. Harold listened now, sometimes joining in brief moments of prayer, sometimes still struggling to find words, but never again laughing at another's hope. He asked me about the church, about the people I loved, wanting to know what faith sounded like when it was lived. We remembered childhood joys, what made us laugh, what made us curious, and between stories, let forgiveness flow freely. Letters from friends and family arrived. Some wrote how his struggle had inspired them to wrestle with their own doubts. Others forgave ancient slights, offering fresh starts or simple wishes for peace. Even old business partners dropped in. "I never understood you, but I respected your conviction. I'm glad you found comfort." Emma's unwavering kindness became a daily miracle. Some afternoons, she'd coax him outside for a walk in the hospital garden, letting sun and fresh air soothe years of bitterness. Harold asked for visits from Pastor Reed, starting with hesitation, then growing in comfort as Reed spoke gently of grace big enough to cover any life. The change in Dad was not flashy or absolute. He still worried. He still felt shame in weak moments, but his heart, once rigid and narrow, expanded to fit the mess, letting faith stand alongside fear without collapse. At night, he wrote small notes for us, apologies, memories, fragments of prayers. One read, "I always thought mercy was weakness. Turns out it's everything." Another, "Thank you for letting me try, even late." Harold's final weeks were marked by grace. He laughed with nurses, asked about their families, listened to others' stories without needing to correct or compete. The bitterness dissolved, replaced not by certainty but by hope. A hope humble enough to ask for help, big enough to accept love. When the end came, Dad's last request was simple. "Pray with me, please. Not for answers, just for peace." We did. The room filled with warmth, tears, and the quiet trust that no life is too broken to recover. No heart so closed it cannot change. For all who find themselves on ruined roads, mercy waits, even for those who mocked it all their lives. If this story resonates, let us know below where you're listening from. Subscribe and find gentle blessing in your own comebacks. The final morning in Dad's hospital room is gentle, golden. Sunlight pushes through sheer curtains, painting soft shapes on the blankets and illuminating quiet faces. Harold rests peacefully, surrounded by family, his breathing calm, a welcome rhythm in a place so often filled with uncertainty. Mom sits quietly at his bedside, her hands folded, lips moving in silent prayer, a ritual so familiar it needs no witness. Emma stands at the window, watching garden flowers sway beneath the breeze, eyes shining but serene. I hold my father's hand, tracing the lines of age, feeling the pulse that only hours ago trembled with fear, but now rests in trust. There are no grand speeches left, no more arguments, no jokes. Just the presence of love, forgiveness, the silent sharing of time that runs out too quickly and somehow remains eternal. The radio still hums with hymns, each note a memory, a piece of the story that started with resistance and ended in the comfort of hope. Nurses enter with reverence, some bowing their heads, honoring the sacred hush. Old friends arrive quietly, adding their prayers to the soft chorus rising in the corner of the room. As the sun climbs higher, Harold takes one last breath, a gentle smile touching his lips. In that perfect stillness, peace fills the air, so complete, so undeniable, and faith, once the object of his mockery, becomes the friend who walks him home. The family remains, lingering in the afterglow. Tears fall, arms wrap around each other, and quiet gratitude stands where bitterness once reigned. We gather Dad's notes, his last words written shakily on scraps of paper. "Don't wait too long to love. Mercy is real. Pray, even if you have to start as a stranger." Outside, the world returns to its motion. Church bells sound in the distance. In our hearts, a new seed of hope is sown, not in certainty, but in the lived experience of forgiveness found too late, yet never denied. The screen fades slowly to black. Nothing left but the hush of grace. Words appear, a last message as simple as the dawn he mocked prayers all his life, until he begged for mercy on his deathbed.